He inherited 700 acres of forgotten land, a legacy meant to be his foundation. But what he discovered on his 18th birthday was that the foundation had already been sold out from under him by the one person he thought he could trust. This is the story of how I lost everything before I ever had it, and what I had to do to reclaim not just the land but myself. If you've ever felt like the world was built on a lie, or that you were starting from a place so far behind you couldn't even see the starting line, then hit that subscribe button. You're in the right place. This community is for us. The air in the warden's office at St. Jude's Home for Boys always smelled the same. Stale coffee, industrial floor cleaner, and the faint, papery scent of forgotten files. For 10 years, that smell had been the backdrop to my life. It was the smell of being a ward of the state, a number on a form, a problem to be managed until the clock ran out. And on that Tuesday, my 18th birthday, the clock had finally, mercifully, run out. Mr. Henderson, a man whose face was a permanent landscape of weary disappointment, slid a thin manila envelope across his metal desk. The sound it made was a dry, final scrape. "Leo, this is it. You're officially aged out. The state's responsibility for you is concluded." He didn't look at me when he said it. He was looking at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder, as if addressing the ghost of the kid I used to be. Inside the envelope was a check for $253.12, the leftover dregs of a Social Security fund opened after my parents' accident. There was also a state-issued ID card with a picture of me looking pale and startled, and a bus token. One token, good for one ride to anywhere in the city. "That's everything?" I asked. My voice felt small and tight in my own throat. He nodded, his eyes still fixed on the wall. "There's one other item. It's been in storage since your grandfather passed. Legally, we couldn't release it to you until you were of age." He grunted as he bent down and pulled a heavy cardboard box from under his desk. It was sealed with yellowed packing tape. My name, Leo Vance, scrawled across the top in thick, black marker. The sight of it sent a strange, cold jolt through me. My grandfather, Samuel. He died 2 years ago when I was 16. They'd told me in this very office. Another flat, sterile fact delivered without emotion. I hadn't been allowed to go to the funeral. Wards of the state, apparently, were too much of a liability to transport across county lines for something as sentimental as a final goodbye. I just got a notice, another piece of paper for my file. I remember staring at it, the words blurring, feeling nothing and everything all at once. He was the last piece of my real family, the only one who still wrote letters, his handwriting a spidery, elegant script that felt like a connection to a world before St. Jude's. After my parents were gone, he was supposed to be my guardian, but he was already too old, too sick. So the state took me and he became a voice on the phone, a name on an envelope. I took the box. It was heavier than I expected. "Thank you," I mumbled, the words tasting like dust. Mr. Henderson finally looked at me, a flicker of something almost human in his eyes. "Good luck, Leo. The world's not an easy place." It wasn't an apology or a warning. It was just a statement, as empty as the hallway I was about to walk down for the very last time. I carried the box and the envelope out of the office, down the linoleum corridor that had echoed with the sounds of angry, lonely boys for as long as I could remember. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. The other boys weren't friends. We were just survivors, clinging to the same cold raft. We knew better than to form attachments. Attachments were liabilities. Outside, the city air was thick with exhaust fumes and the promise of a rain that never seemed to wash anything clean. I walked 3 blocks to a bus stop, the box digging into my hip, and sat on the cold plastic bench. I opened the envelope first. The check felt like both a fortune and an insult. The ID made me look like a suspect. The bus token felt like a joke. Then I turned to the box. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the old tape. The smell that rose from it was completely different from the office. It smelled of pine needles, old paper, and something that reminded me of my grandfather's worn flannel shirts. It smelled like a memory I could almost touch. Inside, nestled in yellowing newspaper, were his things. A collection of whittled wooden birds, each one impossibly detailed. A worn leather-bound copy of a book of poems he used to read to me. A framed photograph of him and my grandmother, their faces young and full of a light I couldn't imagine. And under all of that, a thick, legal-sized envelope. It was addressed to me in his familiar script. My heart hammered against my ribs. It felt like a message from the dead, a final conversation we never got to have. I carefully opened it. Inside were several documents, stiff and official. The first was a copy of his last will and testament. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes catching on a single paragraph that made the world tilt on its axis. He had left me everything. His savings, his personal effects, and the property. All of it. The property. He'd always called it the homestead, 700 acres of timberland, and a small farmhouse in a place called Aspen Creek, a rural county I only knew from the postmarks on his letters. 700 acres. The number was so vast, so impossible, it didn't feel real. For a moment, I felt a dizzying surge of hope, a wild, unfamiliar lightness. I wasn't just an aged-out orphan with $200 and a bus token. I was a landowner. I had a place. I had a home. But then my eyes fell on the second document in the envelope. It was a formal notice from the county clerk's office, dated 6 months ago. It was a quitclaim deed, a record of a property transfer. The land, all 700 acres of it, identified by parcel number and legal description, had been transferred from the estate of Samuel Vance to a single owner, my sister, Chloe Vance. My breath caught in my chest. Chloe. She was 4 years older than me. After the accident, she'd been 18, legally an adult. She'd stayed with our grandfather for a few months before taking off, chasing a life somewhere bigger and brighter than a small town. We'd lost touch. She called sometimes, her voice always distant, strained. I tried to tell myself there was a reason, a good reason. Maybe she was holding it for me, protecting it. But a cold knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. Tucked behind the deed was a third document. It was a letter from a law firm representing something called Horizon Development Corporation. It was an offer to purchase the 700-acre Vance property for a sum that made me feel sick to my stomach. It wasn't a fortune, not for that much land, but it was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in my life. The letter was addressed to Chloe, and it was dated just 1 week after the deed transfer. The bus pulled up to the curb with a hiss of air brakes, but I didn't move. The hope that had soared just moments before had crashed and burned, leaving nothing but the bitter taste of ash. My sister. She hadn't just left. She had come back, taken the one thing our grandfather had wanted me to have, and sold it. I sat there on that bench, the city noise fading into a dull roar in my ears, holding a box of memories and a stack of papers that told me I was just as alone and untethered as I had been that morning. The only difference was that now, I had a ghost to chase. The first thing I did was try to call her. I used a quarter of my newfound fortune at a payphone, the receiver cold and greasy against my ear. Her number, the one I had memorized from her sporadic calls, went straight to a flat, automated voice. The number you have dialed is no longer in service, of course. I tried again just in case. Same result. It felt like she had not just moved on, but had actively erased the path behind her. I spent the next 2 days in a haze, staying at the cheapest, grimiest motel I could find, the kind of place where the bedsheets felt damp and the silence was punctuated by arguments from other rooms. I spread the contents of the box across the stained floral bedspread, trying to piece together a puzzle I didn't understand. The whittled birds felt like a mockery, their delicate craftsmanship a reminder of a gentle man whose legacy had been stolen. The letters he'd sent me over the years were full of stories about the land. The way the creek swelled in the spring, the family of deer that lived in the eastern woods, the ancient oak tree that stood on the highest ridge. "This place is in your blood, Leo," he'd written in his last letter. "It's more than just dirt and trees. It's your story. Don't ever let anyone take that from you." Reading those words felt like a physical blow. He had trusted me to protect it, and I hadn't even known it was mine until it was already gone. The anger came then, a hot, sharp-edged thing that burned away the numbness. It was an anger directed at Chloe, at the system that had kept me locked away and ignorant, at the world for being so casually cruel. How could she do it? We were all we had left of our family. I remembered her from before the accident, A girl who braided my hair and told me stories about constellations. Where had that person gone? What could have possibly made her betray not just me, but the memory of the one person who had tried to hold us together? The Horizon Development Letter was the key. It was a slick, corporate document, full of impersonal language about market value and streamlining acquisition. They weren't buying a home. They were acquiring an asset. And they had been ready, waiting. The timing was too perfect. The deed transfer, the offer letter, it was a coordinated move. My sister hadn't just decided to sell on a whim. This was planned. On the third morning, I woke up with a clarity that felt cold and hard as steel. I wasn't going to let it go. Couldn't. It was the only thing I had to fight for. I packed the important papers and the photograph of my grandparents back into the box, leaving the rest in the motel room. I went to the bus station, the same one where I'd arrived in a daze, and walked up to the ticket counter. "A ticket to Aspen Creek," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The woman behind the counter, her face a mask of bored indifference, tapped at her keyboard. "That's a transfer in Reading," then a local line. "It's a long ride. I've got time," I said. The bus ride was a journey through a world I had only seen through the grated windows of St. Jude's. The city's concrete sprawl slowly gave way to suburbs, then to rolling brown hills dotted with oak trees, and finally to the vast, rugged mountains of the north. For hours, I just watched the landscape slide by, the rhythm of the road a comforting hum beneath me. I saw farms with weathered red barns, fields of green and gold, and rivers that snaked through deep canyons. It was a world that felt solid, real, ancient. It was the world my grandfather had written about. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, traveling toward a place that was supposed to be mine but felt as distant as a foreign country. With every mile, the anger I felt toward Chloe began to curdle into something more complicated. It was confusion and a deep, aching sadness. I tried to remember the good things, the small moments of kindness from our fractured childhood. Her reading to me by flashlight under the covers. The time she saved her allowance for a month to buy me a secondhand comic book. It was hard to reconcile that girl with the woman who would sell off our family's history. Was it the money? Was she in trouble? Or had she simply become someone I no longer knew? Someone for whom the past was just a burden to be discarded? The bus finally pulled into Aspen Creek late in the afternoon. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a gas station, a diner, a general store, and a handful of houses. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth. A sign hanging over the store read, "Aspen Creek, Pop 412. It was the smallest place I had ever been. I felt instantly out of place in my city clothes, my thin jacket useless against the mountain chill. I had no plan, no idea what I was going to do. I only knew I had to see it. I had to stand on the land that was supposed to be mine. I asked the man at the gas station for directions to the Vance property. He was old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, and he looked at me with a curious, searching gaze. "Samuel's boy?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I just nodded, unsure what to say. He gave me a sad, knowing smile. "It's a ways out. Follow the old logging road about 5 miles east. Can't miss it. Big old farmhouse, needs a coat of paint. Or did last I saw." He paused, then added, "Sorry about your granddad. He was a good man. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man." The simple, honest sympathy from a stranger almost broke me. It was more kindness than I'd received in a decade at St. Jude's. I walked. The 5 miles felt like a pilgrimage. The gravel road crunched under my worn sneakers, and the trees on either side rose up like the pillars of a cathedral, their branches filtering the late afternoon sun into 1,000 golden shafts of light. The silence was immense, broken only by the chirping of birds and the rustle of wind in the leaves. It was a beautiful, intimidating, and deeply lonely place. And then I saw it. The road opened into a clearing, and there, set back against a line of dark pines, was the farmhouse. It was just as the man had described. A 2-story white house, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, a wide porch sagging slightly on one end. A massive oak tree, the one from my grandfather's letters, stood guard beside it, its branches spreading wide enough to shade the entire yard. The place looked abandoned, asleep. A for sale sign was hammered into the dirt near the driveway. Not just any sign. It was a large, glossy corporate sign. The logo was a stylized sun rising over a mountain. Horizon Development Corporation. They hadn't even waited. They were already carving it up, selling it off. The sight of it reignited the fire in my gut. This wasn't just a transaction for them. It was a conquest. I walked up the cracked concrete path to the front porch. The door was locked, but a window beside it had a broken pane, patched poorly with a piece of cardboard. It was a simple thing to pry it loose and slide the window open. I hesitated for only a second. This was breaking and entering. But then I thought, how can you break into a place that's already been stolen from you? I hoisted myself through the window, landing with a soft thud on the dusty floorboards inside. The air was thick with the smell of disuse, dust, decaying wood, and the faint, sweet scent of mice. But underneath it all was that same smell from the box, the scent of pine and old memories, the smell of my grandfather. I was home. The house was a time capsule. Everything seemed to be exactly as my grandfather had left it. A layer of dust covered every surface, a fine gray powder that softened the edges of the furniture and muted the colors of the room. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. In the living room, a worn armchair was pulled up to a cold, empty fireplace. A stack of books sat on a small table beside it, a pair of reading glasses resting on top of the uppermost one. It was as if he'd just gotten up for a moment and never came back. I ran my hand along the back of the chair, the faded floral fabric ruff beneath my fingers. I could almost see him sitting there, his tall, lanky frame folded into the cushions, reading by the firelight. The pain of his absence was a sudden, sharp ache in my chest. This was what they had taken from me. Not just the land, not just a house, but this, the chance to know this place, to be a part of its story. I moved through the downstairs rooms like a ghost, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The kitchen was small and simple, with a porcelain sink and faded linoleum floors. A calendar on the wall was still turned to the month he died. Each day was marked with a small, neat X, until they just stopped. The sight of that final, unmarked square was more devastating than any gravestone. Upstairs, there were 2 small bedrooms. One was clearly his. The bed was neatly made, a patchwork quilt folded at its foot. The other room was empty, save for a small wooden bed frame and a dresser. This must have been my father's room when he was a boy. I stood in the doorway, trying to imagine him here, a child in this quiet house, surrounded by these immense woods. It was a past I had no access to, a history I could only guess at. I spent hours just walking through the house, touching things, trying to absorb the feeling of the place. It was a house filled with the quiet evidence of a life well lived, a life of solitude but not of loneliness. In his bedroom, I found a small wooden desk tucked into a corner. On it was a stack of paper, an old fountain pen, and a half-finished letter. The ink had faded to a pale blue. "My dearest Leo," it began. My breath hitched. "I hope this letter finds you well. The snows are coming early this year, blanketing the ridge in white. It makes the world quiet, gives a man time to think." The letter trailed off there, unfinished. A final thought he never got to share. It was in that desk that I found the first real clue. Tucked away in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old tax returns, was a leather-bound journal. It wasn't a diary, not exactly. It was more of a ledger, a record of the farm. The entries were dated, stretching back years. He wrote about the weather, the price of timber, repairs he needed to make to the barn. But woven in between these practical notes were his thoughts, his worries. I sat on the floor, the journal open in my lap, and began to read. The early entries were full of hope. He wrote about my parents, about their plans to one day move back and help him with the land. Then came the entries after the accident. They were shorter, sparser, filled with a grief so profound it seemed to bleed through the ink on the page. "They're gone," he wrote. "The light has gone out of this house." He wrote about me and Chloe, about his fight to get custody, and his heartbreak when the state decided he was too old, his income too unreliable. "They've taken my boy," one entry read, the handwriting shaky and blurred. "They've sent him to a place with no trees." As I read on, a new theme emerged. A company, Horizon Development, had started making inquiries about the land. At first, the offers were polite, formal. He always refused. "This land is not for sale," he wrote. "It is not an asset. It is a legacy," but they were persistent. The entries became more agitated. He wrote about their representatives showing up unannounced, about letters that felt more like threats than offers. They talked about eminent domain, about zoning changes, about how the value of his property would plummet if he didn't sell to them. "They are vultures," he wrote, "circling, waiting for me to die." He mentioned Chloe more frequently in the later entries. She had come to stay with him after she'd left her dead-end job in the city. He wrote about her being lost, adrift. He worried about her. "She has a good heart, but she's easily swayed," he noted. "She sees the dollar signs, not the roots in the ground. She doesn't understand what this place means." The last entry was dated just a week before his death. It was short, almost frantic. "Horizon is pushing hard. They're pressuring Chloe now, telling her she'll be responsible for the estate taxes, that she'll lose everything anyway. They're poisoning her against me, against this place. I need to protect Leo. I need to make sure he gets the land, no matter what. There has to be a way." I closed the journal, my mind reeling. This wasn't a simple story of a greedy sister. It was more complicated, more tragic. Chloe hadn't just shown up out of the blue. She had been here, living in the middle of this corporate siege. They had been working on her, wearing her down. The deed transfer wasn't just a betrayal. It was a surrender. My anger towards her began to soften, replaced by a cold, hard fury directed at the faceless corporation that had torn my family apart for a second time. They hadn't just bought a piece of land. They had systematically dismantled a family's will, preying on grief and vulnerability to get what they wanted. I sat there in the dusty silence of my grandfather's room, the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor. I finally understood. This wasn't just my fight. It was his, and I was the only one left to finish it. The next morning, I walked back into town. My first stop was the diner. I needed coffee, and more importantly, I needed information. The place was small and warm, smelling of bacon and brewing coffee. A handful of older men sat at the counter, their conversation a low, comfortable murmur. I took a seat at the end, feeling their eyes on me. The waitress, a woman with a kind, tired face, brought me a menu. "You're new here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Just visiting," I said. "I'm Samuel Vance's grandson." Her expression softened immediately. "Oh, honey, we were all so sorry to hear about Samuel. He was a fixture in this town. Are you here about the property?" The words spread down the counter like a slow-burning fuse. The men stopped their conversation and turned to look at me. One of them, the man I'd met at the gas station, spoke up. "That Horizon company has been sniffing around here for years. They want to put in one of those fancy golf resorts for rich folks from the city. Samuel told them to go to hell more times than I can count." Another man chimed in, his voice laced with bitterness. "They're relentless. They bought out the old Miller place last year, practically stole it. Old man Miller had medical bills piling up. They know how to squeeze people." I listened, absorbing every word. My grandfather hadn't been paranoid. He'd been under attack. I told them what I knew, that my sister had sold the land. A wave of disappointment washed over their faces. "We heard she'd come back to stay with him," the waitress said, refilling my coffee cup. "Poor girl. She always seemed a bit overwhelmed by it all. Samuel, he was rooted to that land. I don't think she ever understood." There was no malice in her voice, only a sad resignation. They didn't see Chloe as a villain. They saw her as another victim. My grandfather's journal had mentioned a lawyer, a woman named Evelyn Reed, who had helped him with his will. I found her office in a small brick building next to the post office. The sign on the door was simple: Evelyn Reed, attorney at law inside. The office was cluttered with books and files, a stark contrast to the sterile corporate law firm that had sent the letter. Ms. Reed was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, no-nonsense demeanor. She listened patiently as I laid out the entire story, spreading the documents from my grandfather's box across her desk. She examined the will, the quitclaim deed, and the letter from Horizon. Her expression remained neutral, but I could see a flicker of concern in her eyes. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. "I remember your grandfather well, Leo. He was a man of principle. He loved that land, and he loved you. He spoke of you often." She paused, her gaze steady. "I'm going to be honest with you. This is not good. The quitclaim deed is a legally binding document. Your sister, Chloe, was named as the executor of the will. That gave her the authority to act on behalf of the estate. When she signed that deed, she transferred the title. From a legal standpoint, the land is no longer part of your grandfather's estate. It belongs to her, or whoever she sold it to." The words landed like stones in my stomach. "So that's it? It's just gone. Legally," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Your recourse would be to sue your sister for improperly executing her duties as executor. You would have to prove she intentionally acted against the interests of the will's beneficiary. That is a very difficult, very expensive, and very ugly fight to win. Especially since you have no money and she has, presumably, been paid by Horizon." The hopelessness of it all washed over me. I was an 18-year-old with less than $200 to my name, up against my own sister and a massive corporation with a team of lawyers. It was an impossible fight. Ms. Reed seemed to read my thoughts. "However," she continued, a slight shift in her tone, "your grandfather was a very clever man, and he was worried about this exact scenario. He was worried about Chloe being pressured." She pulled a thick file from a cabinet. "This is his file. He came to see me about a month before he passed. He was exploring options to protect the land. Conservation easements, trusts. He wanted to put the land beyond the reach of anyone, including, perhaps, his own family if they made a poor decision." Just then, her phone rang. She answered it, her voice becoming crisp and professional. "Evelyn Reed speaking. Yes, he is." "I see." She listened for a long moment, her eyes fixed on me. Her expression hardened. "Understood. I will relay the message." She hung up the phone and took a deep breath. "That was a lawyer from Horizon Development. They know you're in town. They know you're in my office. They want to make this easy for everyone." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They are offering you $10,000, she said, her voice flat, "in exchange for signing a document that waives any and all future claims you might have to the Vance property. They want you to disappear $10,000. It was an absurd, life-changing amount of money. It was a ticket out of my past, a chance to start over somewhere new, to forget about St. Jude's, to forget about Aspen Creek, to forget about everything. I could take that money and build a life. A small life, maybe, but my own. All I had to do was walk away. Let them have the land. Let them destroy my grandfather's legacy. Let them win." The silence in the office was deafening. I could feel Ms. Reed's eyes on me, waiting. It was the ultimate test. Was I my grandfather's grandson? Or was I just another lost kid looking for an easy way out? Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, you've probably faced a moment like this. A moment where the easy path is right there in front of you, gleaming and full of promise, and the right path is uphill, covered in thorns, with no guarantee of a destination. It's the kind of choice that defines you. For 10 years, I'd been told what to do, where to go, who to be. I'd had no choices at all. Now I had one, a real one, and it felt like the weight of the entire world was resting on it. I'm guessing you know what it feels like to have that weight on your shoulders. If you do, let me know in the comments. We're all just trying to figure out which path to take. Now, let's get back to that little office in Aspen Creek, with the smell of old books and the $10,000 question hanging in the air. I looked at Ms. Reed, at her calm, waiting face, and I thought of my grandfather. I thought of his letters, his whittled birds, his unfinished note on the desk. I thought of his stubborn refusal to sell, his fight to protect a legacy he believed was more valuable than money. $10,000 was a fortune to me. But what was the cost? My soul? My connection to the only family I had left, even if that connection was just a piece of land and the memory of a man I barely got to know? No, I said. The word came out quiet, but it felt as solid as the mountains outside. Tell them no. A slow smile spread across Evelyn Reed's face. It was the first time I'd seen her expression truly change. It was a smile of approval, of respect. I was hoping you'd say that, she said. Your grandfather would be proud. Now, that doesn't mean we have a case, but it means we have a fight, and I'm willing to take it on pro bono. For Samuel, she leaned forward, her voice dropping. Horizon doesn't make offers like that out of the goodness of their hearts. They make them to cover their tracks. They're worried about something. Our job is to find out what. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in years, even though my path was now infinitely harder. I had an ally. I had a purpose. I walked back to the farmhouse not as a trespasser, but as a guardian. It was my home and I was going to defend it. That night, I slept in the farmhouse for the first time. I didn't have a sleeping bag, so I pulled the old patchwork quilt from my grandfather's bed and wrapped myself in it on the living room floor in front of the cold fireplace. The house creaked and groaned around me, the sounds of an old structure settling its bones. It should have been terrifying, but it wasn't. Felt like the house was talking to me, telling me its secrets. I lay awake for hours, staring up at the dark ceiling, my grandfather's journal resting on my chest. I kept going back to his last entry. I need to protect Leo. I need to make sure he gets the land, no matter what. There has to be a way. It wasn't a cry of defeat. It was a statement of intent. He was a planner, a methodical man. The journal was full of his careful calculations and observations. He wouldn't have just given up. He would have made a contingency plan. But where was it? The will was straightforward. The legal documents all pointed to Chloe. What had I missed? I thought about the house itself. My grandfather had lived here his entire life. He knew every inch of it, every loose floorboard, every hidden corner. The answer wasn't in a law office. It was here, somewhere within these walls. The next morning, I began to search. I started in his bedroom, going through the desk again, this time more carefully. I tapped the wood panels, checked for false bottoms in the drawers. Nothing. I went through his closet, sifting through his old clothes, checking the pockets. I found a handful of loose change, a crumpled receipt for tractor parts, and a single smooth river stone. I moved through the rest of the house with the same methodical focus. I checked under carpets, behind furniture, in the back of kitchen cabinets. Nothing. The day wore on, and a familiar sense of despair began to creep in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he had just run out of time. By late afternoon, I was in the living room, sitting in his armchair, feeling defeated. My eyes drifted to the fireplace. It was made of massive, rough-hewn river stones, clearly built by hand. My grandfather had been a stonemason in his younger years. He'd written about building this fireplace with his own father. It was the heart of the house. I ran my hand over the cool, uneven surfaces of the stones. And then I felt it. One of the stones, just to the right of the hearth, was slightly loose. It wasn't obvious, but when I pressed on it, it shifted, just a fraction of an inch. My heart started to pound. I pushed my fingers into the crack around the stone and pulled. It was heavy, but it moved. With a low scraping sound, the stone came free from the wall. Behind it was a small, dark cavity. And inside that cavity was a metal box, the kind used for cash or important documents. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. I felt a surge of frustration. But then I remembered the river stone I'd found in his pocket. It was smooth, flat, and thin. On a hunch, I looked at the lock on the box. It wasn't a keyhole. It was a small, unmarked slot. I slid the river stone into the slot. It was a perfect fit. With a soft click, the lock released. I lifted the lid, my hands shaking. Inside, lying on a bed of faded velvet, were two things. A stack of envelopes tied with a piece of twine, and a small hand-carved wooden key. The envelopes were addressed to me. The handwriting was my grandfather's. This was it. This was his contingency plan. I took the box over to the window, where the last of the evening light was filtering through the trees. I sat on the floor and untied the twine. There were 5 letters in total, each one numbered. I opened the first one. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and the worst of my fears has come to pass. It means the wolves have gotten to Chloe, and she has signed away your birthright. Do not be angry with your sister. Pity her. She is not strong in the way that you are. I saw it in you even as a boy. You have a quiet strength, a core of steel that this world has not yet managed to break. Chloe bends in the wind. I fear this wind was simply too strong for her." The letter went on to explain everything. He knew he was dying. The doctors had given him 6 months. He also knew that Horizon would descend the moment he was gone, and that the estate taxes would be a crushing burden. He had a plan to put the land into a conservation trust, but it took time he didn't have. So he created a desperate, flawed plan of his own. "I have made Chloe the executor of my will," he wrote. "I have told her to transfer the deed to her name. I know this sounds like madness, Leo, but you must understand. As long as the property was in my name, or in the name of my estate, Horizon could tie it up in legal challenges for years after my death. They could claim I was not of sound mind, they could contest the will. But a transfer from a living person, Chloe, to another entity is much harder to challenge. I instructed her to transfer the deed and then immediately sell the entire property for $1 to the Aspen Valley Land Trust. It was a way to get the land into safe hands, to protect it from the developers forever. My head was spinning. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a strategy. A clumsy, desperate strategy, but a strategy nonetheless. Chloe wasn't a villain. She was a pawn in our grandfather's final, desperate chess game. I tore open the second letter. "The problem," he wrote, "is Horizon. They have an informant in the county clerk's office. I am certain of it. They will know about the deed transfer the moment it is filed. They will get to Chloe before she can get to the land trust. They will offer her money, a life-changing amount for a girl who has never had anything. They will scare her with stories of tax debt and legal fees, and I fear she will break. I have tried to prepare her, but she does not have my faith in the land. She has your mother's desire for the bright lights of the city. Cannot blame her for that, but I cannot let her sacrifice your future for it." The third letter contained financial documents. Bank statements, records of small, regular cash withdrawals over the course of his final year. Totaled nearly $50,000. "I have not been idle," he wrote. "I have sold off the timber rights to the north quarter of the property, a section of new growth pine that will recover in a decade. I did not tell Chloe about this money. It is not for her. It is for you. It is your war chest. You will need a lawyer. You will need to live. This is your start." My eyes blurred with tears. He had been slowly, secretly liquidating a part of his legacy to create a final gift for me, a weapon to fight for the rest of it. He had thought of everything. The fourth letter was the most damning. It contained copies of correspondence between Horizon and a local county official, along with sworn affidavits from 2 other local landowners who had been pressured and lowballed by the company. He had been building a case against them in secret. "They are not just aggressive, they are corrupt," he wrote. "They use insider information and intimidation. This is your leverage, Leo. They do not want this information to become public. It could jeopardize their other developments, their entire business model. They think they are fighting a grieving, unprepared young woman. They are not prepared for you. They are not prepared for the truth." The final letter was short, and it broke my heart. "I am so sorry to leave you with this fight. A boy of 18 should be thinking about his future, not fighting the ghosts of the past. But I am out of time. I am trusting you with this, Leo. I am trusting you to save the land, and to save your sister from her own mistakes. Do not hate her. Forgive her. Your parents are gone. I am gone. You two are all that's left. Don't let them take that from you, too. Family is the only thing that matters more than the land." And then, a final line, a postscript that hit me like a physical blow. "The wooden key opens the floor safe in the barn, under the main threshing floor. That's where you'll find the money. Go get it. And then go get your sister. I sat on the floor, the letters spread around me, the last rays of sunlight fading outside. The whole world had been turned upside down and then righted again. The story I had told myself, the story of abandonment and betrayal, was gone. In its place was a much more complicated story of fear, desperation, and a grandfather's fierce, protective love that reached even beyond the grave. My choice was clear. This was no longer about winning back a piece of property. It was about rescuing my sister and honoring the last wish of the man who had given everything to protect us. I had the truth, I had the evidence, and I had a war chest. The fight was just beginning. The first call I made was to Evelyn Reed. I read her my grandfather's letters over the phone. There was a long silence on the other end when I finished. "My God," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and anger. "Samuel, that magnificent, stubborn old man. He built his own case from his deathbed. She told me to stay put, not to touch the money yet, and to bring her the box and all its contents first thing in the morning." Her mind was already working, formulating a strategy. "This changes everything, Leo," she said, a new energy in her voice. "This isn't just a probate dispute anymore. This is evidence of tortious interference, possibly even corporate racketeering. Horizon didn't just make an offer. They actively sabotaged a planned legal transaction. We have them." My second call was the one I dreaded. I had to find Chloe. I didn't have her new number, but my grandfather's letters mentioned the city she'd talked about moving to. I started with a simple online search for her name. Nothing. I tried social media. I found a few old, abandoned profiles, but nothing current. It was as if she had vanished. Then I remembered the law firm's letter, the original offer from Horizon. It had been mailed to her at a specific address. A long shot, but it was all I had. I called directory assistance for that city and asked for a Chloe Vance. There was only one listing. I dialed the number, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It rang 3 times, and then a hesitant voice answered. "Hello." It was her. Older, more strained, but unmistakably Chloe. "Chloe," I said. "It's Leo." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a long, heavy silence. I could hear the sound of traffic in the background, a world away from the quiet of the farmhouse. "Leo," she finally whispered. Where are you?" "I'm at the farmhouse," I said. "I'm at Grandpa's." Another silence. This one was filled with shame. "Oh, God," she said, her voice cracking. "Leo, I'm so sorry. I can explain. It's not what you think." "I know," I said softly. "I know about the plan. I know about the land trust. I found his letters." I heard a sound like a muffled sob. "He told you?" "He told me everything," I said. "He told me Horizon got to you. He told me not to be angry." "I was so scared," she choked out, the words tumbling over each other in a rush of confession. "After he died, they were everywhere. The lawyers, the taxes. They said I'd lose the house, that I'd be in debt for the rest of my life. They offered me money, so much money. I just wanted it to be over. I thought I could take the money and give you half, that it would be better for both of us than a piece of land we couldn't afford to keep." "He left money for us, Chloe," I said. "He left a way to fight them." I told her about the hidden box, about the evidence he'd collected. As I spoke, I could feel the tension draining out of her voice, replaced by a dawning sense of wonder and relief. "He really thought of everything, didn't he?" she said, her voice thick with tears. "He was always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. He wanted us to fight this together," I said. "He wanted me to find you. He wants us to be a family." That was when she truly broke down, the raw, ragged sound of a year's worth of guilt and fear pouring out of her. I just listened, letting her cry, the hundreds of miles between us collapsing into a single, shared moment of grief and reconnection. We weren't the Vance estate versus Chloe Vance anymore. We were the Vance siblings versus the world. And for the first time, it felt like we might have a chance. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Chloe took a bus back to Aspen Creek. arriving with one small suitcase and the haunted look of someone who had been running for a very long time. Seeing her on the porch of the farmhouse was surreal. She was thinner than I remembered, her face etched with a weariness that made her look older than her years. We didn't hug at first. We just stood there for a long moment, the unspoken history of the last decade hanging between us. Then, she took a shaky breath and said, "I'm sorry, Leo, for everything," and I said the only thing that mattered. "I know." Me too. We retrieved the money from the barn. The wooden key slid into a keyhole hidden in a floorboard, revealing a small metal-lined safe set in the concrete below. Inside was $50,000 in cash, bundled neatly and wrapped in oilcloth. It felt like treasure from a sunken ship. With Ms. Reed as our guide, we launched our counterattack. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom battle. It was a quiet, strategic war fought with paper and phone calls. Ms. Reed first filed an injunction to halt the sale of the property, using my grandfather's letters as evidence of a contested title. Then, she sent a carefully worded letter to Horizon's corporate headquarters, along with copies of the affidavits my grandfather had collected and a summary of his final plan. She made it clear that we weren't just two orphans they could buy off. We were the inheritors of a meticulously built case against them, and we were prepared to go to the press. We were prepared to expose their entire predatory business model. Their response was swift and silent. Within 48 hours, the "for sale" sign at the end of the driveway was gone. A week later, a courier delivered a legal document to Ms. Reed's office. It was a settlement offer. They would nullify their purchase agreement with Chloe, return her signature, and walk away from the Vance property entirely. In exchange, we would sign a non-disclosure agreement and turn over the evidence my grandfather had collected. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. They were getting away with it, buying our silence. I wanted to fight them, to drag them through the mud. But Ms. Reed, in her quiet wisdom, advised us to take the deal. "You won't beat them in court, Leo," she said. "They would bury you in legal fees and appeals for a decade. This isn't about justice. It's about getting your home back. Your grandfather didn't ask you to slay the dragon. He just asked you to save the castle." She was right. We signed the papers. The next day, Chloe and I walked to the county clerk's office and filed the paperwork for the Aspen Valley Land Trust, selling them the development rights to all 700 acres for the ceremonial sum of $1. The land was safe, forever, could never be logged commercially, never be subdivided, never be developed. It would remain as it was, a wild, beautiful piece of our family's history. The fight was over, and in the quiet aftermath, my sister and I were left standing on the porch of a rundown farmhouse, with a piece of protected land we couldn't afford to maintain and a relationship that was still fragile and full of holes. The money from my grandfather was enough to pay off the back taxes and fix the leaky roof, but that was it. We weren't rich. We hadn't won a lottery. We had simply won back our starting point. We had inherited a responsibility. In the months that followed, Chloe and I began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. We weren't just rebuilding the farmhouse, we were rebuilding our family. We learned to talk to each other again, to fill in the blank spaces of the years we'd spent apart. She told me about her struggles, the loneliness of the city, the constant pressure to make something of herself. I told her about the emptiness of St. Jude's, the feeling of being invisible. We found a common ground in our shared grief, in the memory of the family we had lost. We worked on the house together. We scraped off the old, peeling paint and gave it a fresh coat. We patched the plaster walls and sanded the old floorboards until the beautiful grain of the wood shone through. We planted a garden in the spring, turning over the same soil our grandparents had worked. It was hard, physical work, and it was healing. With every nail I hammered and every board I replaced, I felt like I was reclaiming not just the house, but a piece of myself. The locals in Aspen Creek, who had watched our silent battle from afar, slowly began to embrace us. They would stop by with casseroles, with offers of old tools, with advice on how to fix the ancient plumbing. They saw us not as outsiders, but as Samuel's grandkids, coming home to pick up where he left off. We were becoming part of the fabric of the place. We weren't alone anymore. The resolution wasn't a fairy tale. The scars were still there, Chloe still carried the guilt of her mistake, and I still carried the deep-seated fear of abandonment that comes from a childhood in the system. But we were working through it. We had the land, the house, and each other. We had a second chance. Standing on the porch one evening, watching the sun set behind the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I finally understood what my grandfather had been trying to tell me. The inheritance wasn't the 700 acres. It wasn't the house or the money. It was the choice. He had left me the choice to fight for something that mattered. He had left me the chance to learn that home isn't a place you are given, but a place you build, a place you defend. It's the hard, messy, beautiful work of putting down roots in a world that's constantly trying to tear you up. He hadn't left me a property. He had left me a purpose. And that was a legacy worth more than all the money in the world. He had given me back my story. What I learned through all of this is that inheritance is never about the things we're left. It's about the lessons. It's about the strength we didn't know we had, the forgiveness we didn't think we could give, and the future we decide to build from the broken pieces of the past. Your legacy isn't what you own. It's what you protect. It's the story you choose to live. So I want to ask you, what's the story you're fighting for? What's the legacy you're building, day by day, choice by choice? Share it in the comments below. This channel is a place for stories like ours, for people who know that the most valuable things in life are the ones you have to fight for. If that's you, subscribe and join our community. You're not alone in this fight. We're all just trying to find our way home.